All right, guys, good afternoon. We'll get started with our webinar related to virtual networks on Google Cloud Platform. We'll talk about the agenda quickly, but before we do that, let's do a quick check. If you can see my screen, which is supposed to show a slide with Google Cloud Platform and virtual networks. And also, if you guys can hear me, just give a quick thumbs up in the chat window. If you guys can do that, that would be great. Okay, we have a 1 yes. Screen is visible. Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you, Shashi. Thank you, Divyansh. All right, so we have a bunch of guys who have confirmed that it's visible and it's audible. So let's get started. Right, so what we're going to be discussing for today's session is as follows, as far as the agenda goes. We're going to talk about virtual private network. What are virtual private networks and why would you need them in Google Cloud Platform? We'll talk about how does those networks relate within projects and how does subnetworks relate in turn to the networks itself. And when you're creating a network, you'll need to create certain routes and firewall rules to make sure that your traffic can reach where it is intended to reach. It has the exact path it can follow to reach a particular server or maybe a device that's placed in your network, and it has the appropriate rules. So the traffic is either allowed or denied while trying to reach that particular device. We'll also look at a couple of network designs in terms of high availability and disaster recovery. And then finally, we'll go into a demo where we'll go into a GCP console. We'll try and create a network. We'll try and create firewall rules and create a virtual machine and try and connect to that virtual machine and see how all of that works all together, right? So that's the agenda for today. If you have any questions, if it cannot wait, then put it in the chat window. Otherwise, I would recommend that there will be certain time allocated at the end of the session for you to ask questions. So if you have questions, it can wait till the end of the session, great. If not, then put it in the chat window and I'll try my best to answer it as we go along. Also try and give a pause after 15 minutes to see if there are specific questions in the chat that can be answered then and there. If there is a specific question that will be answered in the follow-up section or follow-up slide, I will skip that and I'll let you know. All right, so what is a virtual private network, right? So if you have worked with networking, or if you have worked with IT devices, which could be your servers, which your machines, your workstations, your systems, you know that all of these machines, all of these resources needs an IP address, right? And where does this IP address come from? For you to get an IP address, there needs to be a network. And within the network needs a subnetwork from where you will get an IP address allocated. Now, how does that IP address get allocated? That's a different story because we have dynamic host control protocol for that, and that's kind of built in, right? But that's how you probe the dynamic host control protocol to get a dynamic IP address, or if it's a reserved one, then you get a static IP address, and that IP address will be allocated to your machine, right? But before that can happen, you need to have a network. A range of IP addresses needs to be defined from which your resources can get an IP address, right? And this allows you to create a private network. So there are public networks, there are private networks, right? Public networks is something which is open in the internet where people over the internet with proper rules and stuff can talk to each other, right? But what about if you have something specific that you want to hide or isolate from the entire world? So you have like a web server, a database server, and you want to make sure that no one from the outside world can access these resources. So you want to isolate those resources. It could be a machine, a virtual machine. We discussed about Compute Engine. We talked about App Engine. We talked about Kubernetes Engine and stuff, right? Yesterday in our last webinar. Now, following up on that, those resources needs to be placed somewhere into a network, right? And you want to isolate that. That's doable by putting it into a network. Within GCP, we call it a virtual private cloud network, or a VPC network as we have it, right? Now, once you have this inside the network, it could be, having an internal IP, just an internal IP, so it's not exposed to the outside world, or you can even have an external IP as well, which is going to be a public IP address, which allows you to expose this server to the outside world. Example of that would be a web server will have a public IP address, a database server will only have a private IP address. And those, I mean, obviously the web server will have public and private IP address. The database server will only have the private IP address, right? Whenever you start a GCP project, so project is the minimum, resource that, or not resource, project is the minimum allocation that you need to have in GCP account, which has billing associated with it. And this is where you can create resources, right? Virtual Private Cloud is basically a resource, and it will also be created within a project inside of GCP. So project is a container where you will be creating all GCP resources, right? And networks are placed within a project, right? When you start a project, you will start with a default project by default, right? But you can also create other projects, other networks as well, like custom networks and auto networks, which we'll talk about, in a more detailed course somewhere else. But yeah, you need to understand that it's not that, you have to live with the network that is provided by GCP, which is created by default, but you can also have, your own customized networks as well within that project, within GCP, to isolate your resources within that network. Right. One of the key aspects of Google's network or these VPC networks is that, first of all, if we talk about the physical networking layout of Google, the entire physical networking layout of Google consists of dark fiber network spread across the entire globe. And this image kind of summarizes, the layout of the cables on how they are laid across the continents, across the oceans, to give you an entire set of network which spans across the entire globe, right? The benefit that you get as a customer is that when you create your VPC networks, which is a logical entity inside of GCP, you can use this entire set of network for you as a customer as well. So this has been extended to you by GCP as a customer as well. So now when you create networks, instead of creating networks which are only scoped within a particular region, let's say just Melbourne or just Mumbai or Delhi, you will create networks that are scoped across the entire globe, right? That makes things like disaster recovery, high availability, a lot easier to achieve, right? And we'll talk about that in the common network designs sections, which is supposed to come at the last. And I'll also show you a demo as well on how that works when we go into the lab section and the demo section, right? But this is the idea, right? These cables are laid across the globe. This is something that Google has already heavily invested on, and they are allowing you to use this as a service, so you as customers can also have global networks. Right. So I did talk about projects and networks a bit. I'm just going to elaborate a little bit more on that, just so that you understand. When you create an account within Google, Google by default asks you to create a project or creates a default project or your first project for you, right? These projects is like a container. Now, project is the last item in the hierarchy. So it starts with organization, then you can have folders, and then you can have projects, right? But you need to have a project. You can have a project without an organization and without a folder as well, but project is the minimum thing that you need, a container where you can create resources. If you do not have a project, you cannot create any resource. Resource can be networks, compute engine instances, or Kubernetes instances, maybe storage solutions like cloud storage, big data, and so on, right? So all of these needs to fall under a project, and project is the one where you get billed for as well. Now, there is a limit on maximum quota that you can have within a project. So you can have a maximum quota of 5 networks within a project, right? If you need more than that, you need to submit a case with Google to see if you can increase the limit, or you can start a different project, right? But again, with the kind of networks that you can have within Google, I do not see a reason why you would not be able to circumvent within 5 networks, right? Unless there is a specific requirement to do that. Right? Obviously, if you have different applications, have different projects, and within those different projects, you can work on different applications and so on. Then within that, we have network, right? And I'll talk about this, but whenever, if you have seen a network somewhere, if you've seen a network anywhere in any organization, you'll know that you need to first allocate a range that you need to allocate, and within that you can carve out sub networks, and I'll show you that in the next diagram. But within Google, you don't need to do that. You can have a network by just giving a name, and you'll see this in the demo as well, that I'll create a simple network by just specifying a name for that network, and that's it. And within that, I can create sub networks with any range that is part of the private subnetwork ranges, and I can assign resources within that, and those resources will take IP address from those subnetworks, and they will span across all available regions, that is global GCP regions, that we have inside of GCPs, the data centers and regions that we have within GCP ecosystem. There are three types of networks. As you can see, there is default one, which you will see if you log in for the first time, and I'll show you during the demo that there is a default one that is already present there. It is created by Google for you. So if you have no networking skills whatsoever, and obviously you need to create resources, and you won't be able to create resources because you need a network for that, right? So if you have no knowledge about networks and you still want to get started, Google gives you a default network which you can use if you have no networking knowledge whatsoever. If you want to create your own specific networks, but still you want automation for that, so there is Google's intelligence behind building these networks. You can use auto networks. And if you want to start from scratch, where you want to define your network, your firewall rules, your sub networks, control over those ranges and stuff as well, and define what's required and what's not within that network configuration, then you can use the custom one. And custom one is the one we'll demo, because that's what you will be creating anyways in your environments. And that's what we'll demo in our demo section at the end of this particular class. Right. So we did talk about this, that if you were creating a physical network hierarchy anywhere else outside of Google, what you will do is you'll have a top level range, right? For example, 10.0.0./ let's say 16. Underneath that, you'll carve out subnetworks 10.1.0.0/24, then 10.2.0.0/24, and so on up till 10.10.0.0/24, right? So, and underneath that, you'll have resources which will have an IP address like 10.1.0.1, 2, 3, and so on, right? And this is what a hierarchy will look like in general in any other cloud platform or any other physical network that you are architecting or designing, right? But not in Google. It's different. You can create a network by just simply specifying a name. For example, just network, or maybe network one. Underneath that, you can create subnetworks like marketing subnetwork, production subnetwork, development subnetwork. Now, don't get me wrong here that I'm trying to give an idea that you can have networks where you can differentiate production and development across different networks, right? You probably will want to do this at the project level, or maybe at the folder level within an organization, which is hierarchy above the project level. But you can also segregate this within a network as well, right? So the idea is that the option is there to do it before you actually create a project, right? Or if you just have a project and you want to do it at the network level, then there is an option to do that as well. So instead of having a subnetwork range, define a group of IP addresses where it fits into that hierarchy, what you do is you define a subnetworks based on department, business functions, or systems or environments, right? That's what you can do with subnetworks within Google Cloud, right? Any questions so far? Everyone still with me? Can hear me? Can see my screen? Okay, great. Thank you, Akshay. Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you guys for confirming. Great. We'll keep going. What's the difference between can these different department can have overlapping IP addresses? And that's a question from Sashi Ranjan. That's a very good question. And no, because they does fall in a single network, they cannot have overlapping IP addresses, right? Even if you try and create it, it will throw out an error at you and say that, okay, this is not allowed. There's a question from Kishore. Can we create VLANs right inside the 10 dot network? Yes, absolutely. You can do that. Within that, you can create another subnetworks with, that particular hierarchy. Indikant, people, please explain physical network hierarchy. Okay. So normally when you create when you create a physical hierarchy, the first thing that you do is you basically assign a range of IP addresses, right? That you can allocate IP addresses from, right? And that range will have a subnet mask. For example, 10.0.0.0/16, which means that 10.0, 10.0, this is basically reserved, right? And from there on, you can add IP addresses, or you can add masks for the subnetworks from this bit and this bit, right? So when you create a subnetwork between that, you can have anything that is above 16, right? So above is actually lower, right? So over here, you'll have 10.0. There is something wrong with this diagram. It needs to be updated. So there it goes like, or actually I can have like 10.0.0.0/8 instead of 16. I think that's what the diagram wanted to signify anyway, which means that this is reserved. You cannot change this, but any one of these bits can change, right? So what you can do is 10 dot, this can change, and this remains the same with 24, or if you're using 16, then this and this can change, right? And these two are reserved, and this will be reserved for IP addresses later on, or maybe if you're doing subnetting, then it will be used in that case, right? Now, obviously, I cannot explain all of that in 1 hour for sure, right? So there probably will be a network. You'll have to take a network class to go into more details of that, but just understand that you'll allocate a range, and from that range you can carve out more subnet addresses, and from there on you can have more of these, right? So there is a question from Bharat. Can we modify the subnet length once created? Not really, unless you have no resources in it. Of course, if you have resources, then you cannot change it. Now, the question is like, if you try and increase it, yes. But if the question is that, you want to go from like this to this entirely, if you have resources in this, then of course you have to delete the resources first, delete this, and then move from this to that, right? Otherwise, if you were trying to increase that, yes, then you can do that for the same subnetwork. Limit of MAC assigned in the project only for default project provided by GCP. Any projects, default project is just a project that is created by you or for you when you create for the first time, right? It is also charged. It's not that it's free, but all accounts or all projects that you create, there is a default quota that is set to 5 networks per project. So that's the default quota that they have set, right? Now you can go to quotas and check that quota and have a limit increased request, submit it to Google if you want to increase that quota. Right. So Google's VPCs are basically global in nature, and we've discussed about this, right? So when you create a VPC network, you can have something like a subnetwork created in one of the regions and have another subnetwork created in another region, right? And both the VMs within that subnetworks, like subnetwork 1 and subnetwork 2, will talk to each other as if they were on one private network. Now, if you're trying to do this on another networks or other cloud platforms, you'll have to pay the network, so you have to figure out a connectivity between these different regions before you can establish this, but not within Google. Since Google networks are global in nature, this is kind of done already for you by Google. And this makes life a lot easier if you're trying to set up a DR, because let's say this VM is basically a DR copy of this particular VM, right? If you were to do this on another platform, you'll have to establish connectivity first and then figure out, how would you accomplish this, but not on Google because that's kind of built in, right? Now, going to the next slide. What happened to this? Oh, sorry, routes. Yeah, okay. Now, when you create a network, you need to define routes. For example, how would this virtual machine that you have created within a subnetwork that is 10.146.0.0 go to the internet, right? So internet is represented as 0.0.0/0, which means all of the IP addresses in the world, right? So if you need these two virtual machines to talk to the internet, how would that happen within your network? You need to define a route table for that, right? What if there are machines within other subnetworks, right? and you want to make sure that, these machines can go and talk to these subnetworks. How would that work, right? For that, you need a routing table. And what we're saying is, from this as source, right, and this as my destination, take this route. So there'll be a routing table which will define, okay, if you need to go to talk to internet, right? If this subnetwork within a network needs to talk to the internet, it needs to use a gateway. What gateway will that be? That will be Internet Gateway, which is created by Google for you, which we'll see in the demo section, that it will be created by Google and it will be assigned automatically as a route. But the idea is that you need to define a source where the traffic will originate from, destination where it needs to go to, and what will be the path that it will follow to reach there. For example, in this case, it will be Internet Gateway. The other case in this case would be if you're trying to reach a particular subnetwork, it could probably be a local gateway, right? A local gateway or a local router that connects two different subnetworks with each other, right? So that will be defined, and you need to use that as a path to reach the other subnetwork, right? That's what route table accomplishes in a nutshell, right? And when you create a first-time network within Google Cloud, you'll have an internet gateway created for you, a local gateway created for you, and these routes defined automatically for you, right? So you don't have to do anything if you do not worry about interconnecting other networks within GCP. But if you have other networks that you want to interconnect with your base network that you have created, then you will be going into route tables and creating additional routes, right? Unless you're not using BGP. If you're using BGP, then BGP will take care of creating those routes for you, but which basically is powered by cloud routers inside of GCP. But that's a different topic of discussion, right? Which is supposed to be covered in the interconnecting network section. But just to give you an idea, unless you are interconnecting different networks or trying to do something, different with your networks, like have a device through which all traffic will flow, right? Then you do not need to touch the route tables, right? Unless you're trying to do interconnecting networks, then you need to, create routes and manage those routes as well. And if you have a device where you want all internet traffic to come and go through that particular device, or have a hub or spoke kind of networking environment that you're trying to set up, then obviously you need to update the route tables accordingly to make sure the traffic is flown through the correct subnetwork or correct devices. So it is basically audited, or maybe there's a firewall that is going to block or allow that traffic while it goes to the internet or comes to, from the internet, right? So this is how routing tables work. There's a question, then how do we isolate the networks, right? So, I mean, networks are themselves isolated. So all the networks that we are talking about over here in this section, if you have another network, for example, network 2, they are isolated. If you really mean is how do we isolate these sub-networks, right? I mean, they're a part of one network. They don't need to be isolated. But however, you need to define firewall rules for every communication to happen. Even one machine needs to talk to another machine, even within same subnetwork, right? In that case, you need to define a firewall rule, right? So the only way that you can have isolation between subnetworks is by defining proper firewall rules. Does that answer your question? I mean, I think that's what you're going for. I mean, if you have the idea that networks are not isolated, they're absolutely isolated from each other. There is no, I'm not trying to say that, different networks can talk to each other. That's not the intended, definition I'm trying to give. What I'm trying to say is that within a network, you create subnetworks, and those subnetworks can talk to each other. They have a route, but you have to create firewall rules for, if you have proper firewall rules that you can define, like what traffic flows from one subnetwork to another or between a subnetwork as well, then firewall rules will be the one that will be, describing that entire, flow of traffic. Right. So next we'll talk about firewall rules. Now, I think you should have a basic idea of what firewall rules are, right? So with firewall rules, you basically allow traffic coming into your network or exiting your network. So you can either allow that traffic or you can deny that traffic, right? Now, the way you create firewall rules in Google is, there are 3 different ways. The first way is that you either allow traffic for the entire network, which means that if you're allowing the port 22, you allow it for the entire network, which obviously you don't want. You want to do it for specific machines or maybe specific subnetworks. Now, there's no way that you can apply it to a specific subnetwork, by the way, inside of Google. And now this will probably become more clear when we go into the demo. However, what you can do is you can tag a specific resource, which is basically known as a network tag, and you can create firewall rules based on network tags. Instead of going and creating firewall rules based on entire networks or subnetworks, you'll be creating rules as tags. Or there's another option, which is by using a service account. A service account is an entity inside of Google that allows two different resources to talk to each other, right? When I say talk, like give permission so that they can talk to each other, really, right? And that's also an option that allows firewall rules, right? So it's not like you can just define a range of IP addresses for destination and then allow traffic, for source. Yes, you can do that, but not for the destination. Destination can only be, entire network, or maybe just, tags, which will be the preferred way of doing things. And I'll show you how, and then also service accounts as well. Right. So let's look at a couple of, network designs that we want to deploy. If you're trying to create a network with increased availability, like high availability, in that scenario, what you would want to do is you will have a region, right? You have a network, and underneath that you have a subnetwork, right? Within that you have a region, and you can create two different virtual machines in two different zones, right? So the way the hierarchy works is that within a particular, there is a global, a list of data centers, right? Or global list of regions. Within regions, we have zones that are built to offer high availability. So what you'll do is you will create a subnetwork, and subnetwork spans the entire region, right? Within that, you can use the same subnetwork to create resources and assign IP address to those virtual machines, right? And that's a design for designing high availability. What if you're designing for globalization, right? Or if you're trying to create a DR, right? In that case, what you can do is you can create two different subnetworks within a network. And within that, you'll have subnetwork 1, subnetwork 2, within region 1 and region 2. And within that, you can create resources within specific zones, and that will offer you globalization or disaster recovery, right? And we'll look at this in the demo section, which will make it more clear, right? Which we're going to start probably in the next section anyways, right? So I'll move towards lab, right? And we'll have all of these, actually seen in action. So it will make much more sense rather than actually, just talking about it. It makes much more sense we actually did this. Right? But before we do that, let me look at the questions. How can we restrict destination IP range? You cannot, right? That's what I was trying to say. The only way to do that is by assigning tags, and it will become more clear when I actually go into the lab and show you, okay, this is the preferred way of doing things, right? Let me take the screen down and let me move to a Google project. Already created and assigned. Okay. Okay, let me know when you guys can see the screen that has a Google project and not the slides actually. Okay, thank you, Sashi, for confirming. Thank you, Divyansh. Okay, so as you can see, I'm within a project. Now, if I don't have a project selected, it will give me an error saying that you need to first select a project, right? So as soon as I select my project, let me try and zoom this a bit so you guys can clearly see. So if I don't have a project selected, I cannot create any resources. I think we discussed that already. So that's the first point, right? You need to have a project selected before you can create any resource, and VPC network is a resource, right? Now, the next thing that you do is, first thing, you see that there is a default network, which is something that we discussed. It is created by GCP when you create a project, right? And you can see the list over here, which has, IP ranges allocated with specific regions, right? And if you go to look at firewalls, you'll see that there are firewalls already created, like default firewalls, and there are default routes as well that are created automatically when this default network was created, right? But we don't want to do that. Like, we don't want to see the default one. Let's get more real estate before we do that, right? And we're going to create our new own specific VPC network. I hope it's visible. I've tried to zoom it, to a much larger size, so you guys can clearly see. Right? If it's not, let me know. But I don't think so I can zoom anymore. Otherwise, it will be difficult for me to actually navigate through the console. Create VPC network. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to prove the first point that we mentioned, that when you create a VPC network, all you're really doing is you're creating a network by creating a name. Network 1. I'm going to look at any of the other settings for now. I'm just going to say cancel this, and I'm just going to say done. So I'm adding no subnetworks as of now. I've selected custom over here and say create. And point proven, if you look at this, a network is being created with no IP ranges, no subnetworks whatsoever. And that was the whole point when we were discussing about, like, okay, can you have a network without, specifying the top level hierarchy IP range? Yes, absolutely. We have seen that you can do that in Google, right? And let's go to network 1, and let's try and add our own subnetworks within that, right? So what I'm going to do is, info panel, I'm going to go and add subnetwork. Now, again, in interest of time, I cannot go through all of the options, right? If an option is specifically not discussed, that simply means that it is outside the scope of this particular webinar, or outside the agenda or scope of this webinar, right? That was not specifically discussed, right? If you're looking to go into, more detail, then of course there are more elaborate courses where we do that. Add subnet, right? I'm going to add a simple subnet. I'm going to call it as subnet A. And I'm going to select a network, which is basically selected already, network 1. And we're going to pick up a region. In this case, I'm going to go with US Central 1. And I'm going to say add. Oh, sorry, forgot to add the IP address range for the subnetwork. 0.0/27, right? And say add. Right? And this was added for US Central. Perfect. So we have a subnet that was created in the US Central with an IP range of 10.0.0/27. Just going to add another one just in case. Add subnet 2, and then assign it a region of Asia East. So you get that global idea, right? That we have basically created 2 subnetworks, one in US Central and one is Asia East, and then assign an IP address to this 10.0.0.0/8. Let's try and do that and see what happens. This is an overlapping IP address, and that was one of the questions that was asked as well, that can you have overlapping IP address? No, I mean 27 is basically a part of this, so it cannot be overlapping, right? So I'm just going to go and say 32/27, and it's not overlapping anymore, and I can say add, right? Can I add more subnetworks within the same region as well? Okay, absolutely, we can extend that as well. And if I were to do that, subnet 3, and go into that region that is US Central again, and this time around, let's say 192.168.10.0/24. And if I try and add that, as you can see, I can, have that created as well. I mean, otherwise it would have given an error. And there's an icon bar over here, which shows you, this bell icon over here at the top. It will show you if a resource is being created or it has failed, and you'll see the messages related to that over here, right? But everything looks good, great. So we can move forward, right? So as you can see, I just created a simple network. It was super simple to create. Some steps, of course, you can add automation as well. You can look at the equivalent REST or the G-Cloud alternative of the command line option to do that over here as well. So if you want automation, you can do that as well. Of course, we have deployment manager that allows you to do that, or if you want to deploy it using Terraform, then obviously there are libraries in Terraform as well that supports this as well. So I mean, the sky is the limit. If you want to do it through the console, that's the boring way of doing things. right? But if you want to build out automation using command line or Terraform or any other, infrastructure as code, utility, then obviously there is ample support for that as well, right? So now let's look at, the firewalls and the routes that we talked about. Like, is there a firewall rule that is created already? So if I go to firewall rules, as you can see that there are no firewall rules that were created, right? Unlike the default network where the firewall rules were created automatically, right? There are no firewall rules that were added over here in this situation, right? Now let's look at routes. Now, unlike firewall rules, there are some default routes. Like I said, it will get created automatically for you when you create a network. And as you can see, that there are certain default routes that are being allocated, right? The first one that I want to point is this one, default route, which is default route to the internet. And as you can see, it takes all the traffic to the internet using a default internet gateway. Now, internet gateway is basically going to be a gateway device that is automatically trained by Google. So you don't have to worry about this, right? But in case you were trying to do something else, like a NAT gateway or something like that, you have to absolutely create that and define the routes in the route table to accomplish that. What about the subnetworks? Now, I have 3 subnetworks that I've created. There is 10.0.0/27. There is obviously this 24 as well, and then there's 32.27 as well. So we have 3 different subnetworks that I've created. And how do these subnetworks talk to each other? Because obviously they are different, part of different ranges. So how do we make them talk to each other? Obviously, you need some kind of routing mechanism for them to talk to each other, and that's why we have a default local route as well. And that is, done through a device called virtual network, which is basically a local gateway that will allow the traffic to flow across different networks, different subnetworks within a network, right? But again, like I said, there is no firewall rules. So 2 machines, if I were to create them, they won't talk to each other, right? Now, great. We have a network, we have no firewall rules, and we have routes, which tells us that all machines should be able to talk to each other. And obviously, all machines should also be reachable over the internet, should be able to reach the internet because we have an internet gateway and a route that takes the machines to the internet. And you should also have a way for those machines to come back and talk to the machines over the internet as well, right? If you have a public IP attached to those machines, right? So great, we can accomplish that, right? So let's go and add some resources, because unless you test this, it won't make any sense. And then I'll show you how to add firewall rules as well. Now let's go to Compute Engine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open tab. Now we do have another webinar coming up which talks about virtual machines in general, and I'm not going to go into how to create virtual machines and stuff. I'm only going to focus on specific parts on only the networking bits on how to place your virtual machines on the network interfaces of this virtual machines within the network that we are going to create, or that we have already created, not going to create, in fact. Right. So if I were to click on create instance now, and let's say I'm trying to create a highly available kind of an environment. So I'll create 2 or 3 instances just to show you that how high availability looks like and so on. So right now I have how many subnetworks? US Central, Asia East, and US Central. So if I were to create highly available instances, what I'll do is let's say A in US Central, right? Instance 1, I'm happy with that. And I'm going to change this to a smaller size, maybe small this, and instead of using this, I'll just use a CentOS 8 machine and say select, and go down to the networking section. And currently there are no tags attached, and we'll talk about that later. I don't want to show that and ruin all the fun. So I need to select the network that I want to place my instance in, which is going to be network 1. As you can see, there is already 2 subnetworks that exist within the US Central. That's why they appear in the dropdown. I'll select one of them. Do I want to assign an ephemeral an IP address? And I can either create a static one, the internal IP address, the private IP address, or I can leave it to ephemeral. I'll leave it to ephemeral for now, which is basically it's going to automatically assign one. And then do you need external IP address, the public IP address we talked about? Yes, in this case, I want one because I'll probably connect to this and maybe do something with this. So I'll have an ephemeral IP address selected as well. So done. And say create. Right? So I have one machine running within US Central A zone, right? Now we talked about how can you create a highly available network design? We already have created one. Now the machine needs to be placed accordingly. So create instance. instance 2, and instead of using the A zone, I'm going to pick B this time around. Go here, change this, CentOS 8, select management, security, networking, select network 1, and within that subnetwork, I'll just pick up a different, and yeah, what I do, in fact, let's go with first generation, cheaper, better, not better, just cheaper. And I'll say create, right? So if I were to go back and see, I have two different machines, instance 1 and instance 2. One is in US Central A and one is in US Central B, right? Within that same, subnetwork that we had, right? So obviously we haven't configured anything to make sure that the data is replicated from instance 1 to instance 2. So it's not really highly available, but you get the idea, right? As per the design goes, if I had some configuration to make sure that the data is replicated or whatever softwares are placed, they are kind of replicated or exist within both the instances, then I'll have a highly available instance. Similarly, if I were to go and create another instance, instance 3, and say, for example, what's the one that I have? Asia East 1. Let's look for Asia East 1, which is Taiwan. Select A, select the machine type. And one standard, change this to back to CentOS. CentOS 8, select networking, and go back to network 1. And the subnetwork already exists, so that's why it appeared in the dropdown, and leave all the other settings as de facto. And of course, we'll have a third instance in another region, which is part of a different subnetwork. And as you can see, we currently do not have any DR configuration or any mechanism to replicate data from instance 1, instance 2, and instance 3. But if we had one, right, which is maybe provided by the software itself, or we have a configuration that supports that with a load balancer or something like that, you can accomplish a DR scenario with this as well, with 3 instances running in, 2 running in highly available mode and the other one in the DR region. So in case this region goes down, you have a way to fail over to that region, and your workload can shift to that particular region, right? So that's how you can, if you create a network like this, then it really comes down at the resource level on your placement of your resources in particular regions and zones, so you can achieve HADR scenarios, right? So now the question is, let's try and connect to this instance. I'm going to connect to one of these, instance 1, and then we'll try and ping these instances to make sure that, because we have one instance in Asia East and one in US, which is like far apart from each other. And we said that they should be able to talk to each other without any additional configuration. And it's time to prove that as well, because we have to prove what we have already mentioned. So let's try that. Let's try with SSH. Before we can ping, we need to get into one of these instances. So I'll try and get into this instance, and it will not work. It will not work because we do not have any firewall rules, right? The first thing that I need to do is assign a firewall rules. So, obviously, if there's no firewall rules attached to that particular instance or that destination, we cannot, go any further with that, right? So I'll go to firewall rules, and this time around, I'll go to add firewall rule. I'm going to call this as allow SSH network 1. So when you define a firewall rule, you can turn on the logs if you want, which means that if you want to see what traffic is allowed and denied, you can turn that on. It's going to take lots and lots of storage as well, because network can have crazy ingress and egress, and it can get crazy. But so we're going to leave that as off for now. But if you're troubleshooting anything, it's a good idea to turn them on. You can set a priority, which means that in what order these rules are read. You're going to leave the priority to 1000 for now, and we'll review this later for the other rules, because this is the first rule. So I'm not going to leave this to 1000. Now, direction of traffic, is it coming in or is it going out, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect to this instance, which means that this instance is basically receiving traffic from us. So it's ingress traffic, right, for this instance. So ingress traffic, let's select that. Do you want to allow or deny? I want to allow SSH. So let's leave that to allow. And then, as you can see, there are 3 different ways on how you can assign destinations, which is basically targets, which is all instances in the network. Obviously, the worst rule that you can create, unless there is a specific requirement. or, I mean, you can match this with allow and deny to make this worthwhile for you. But again, I would not recommend that you use that. We have target tags, which is what we'll look at, and we have service accounts, exactly what we discussed, right? So we're going to go with target tags for now. And I'm going to create one just, from the top of my head, allow SSH. That's it. I think I like this. So it's just a made up name. It's not something that's defined somewhere. I just made this up, right? Source IP addresses can be defined. For example, 0.0.0/0, or maybe just my IP address or whatever. And TCP port 20. SSH is basically port 22. So we're gonna, specify port 22. And now we have the rule. It looks like, I'm allowing SSH, which is incoming going into that virtual machine, and over this tag. And then, for all the IP addresses on port 22. I think that's what I'm doing. And then hit create. So once you hit create, what it will do is it will create that firewall rule. So basically now I should be able to, connect to this. But wait, we created a tag, but we didn't specify that, that tag is related to this instance or this instance or this instance. Now we need to do that as well. If I go to the instance again, and do a quick edit, and go to network tags, all I need to do is match this tag, which is allow SSH. Copy. Let's do this. And let's do a quick save. And let's repeat this step for all 3 instances. So we have basically, and I'll also click and retry as well to make sure that this can now get connected, because we have allowed that firewall rule, right? And then we'll try and ping them and see if that ping works or not. Let's hit retry in the meanwhile. Okay, it looks like it's saved. Let's try and do the same for the other instance as well. Instance 2. And go to network tags, paste, and say save. So we have 2 instances that should accept SSH connections from the outside world. And let's do it for the 3rd one as well. Instance 3. Edit. SSH and say save. So now we should have all 3 instances be able to accept SSH connections, and we can connect to them, and we'll see if we can ping all of these or not. I mean, obviously it's understandable that, the question will be, can you ping across region or not, right? So one of the instances is successfully connected. Let me try and increase the text size to the largest so you guys can clearly see, I believe. And zoom this as well. And let me connect to the other instance as well. Instance, open in the browser window, and then open in the browser window. Right, so we have instance 1, we have instance 2, 1, 2, and 3, right? So they are lined in order. So hopefully we can instance 2 and instance 3, right? So we have all 3 instances lined in order. So we'll form the ping test, right? What I want to ping is, like, can I ping instance 2 first? And I can tell you right now. And okay, before we do that, can you actually tell me if it will work or not? If I try and ping instance 2 on instance 3, will it work or will it not? It will obviously not work because we have no firewall rules that allows ICMP, right? We only have one firewall rule that allows port 22, that is SSH. So unless you have a specific firewall rule that allows traffic between these instances, there's no way that, they will be able to talk to each other, right? So if you think that, I mean, there are people that says that, it will work. No, it will not work. And I can show you that. ping 3. So it's not able to ping any of that, or any other machine will not be able to ping each other, vice versa, right? So that will not work because we don't have an ICMP rule that has been created. Yes. Right. Sashi Ranjan says no route table. No, Sashi, that's also wrong, because I mean that's definitely not the issue, because we already discussed that if you look at the route tables, by default there's a local route that was created that allows different subnetworks to talk to each other, right? So that's already in place. So if you look at this can talk to all of the networks, and this can talk to all the networks within the virtual network, and so applies to this. So it's definitely not going to be route table, because local routes is created by default when you create a network, but you definitely need to assign proper firewall rules for this to make this work, right? So now let's go to firewall rules and add one, right? And what we need to do is allow ICMP, and just give it a nice name, so we can look at it and see if this makes sense or not. Right now, if I want this to be read afterwards, I can assign it a different priority of, let's say, 2000. Right? Normally, priority will work if you have like a similar rule with both allow and deny. That's why priority will make sense. But I mean, it's really up to you how we're going to define it. So incoming, of course, you want traffic to come in, right? And then allow, yes, you want to allow that. Now, I can go and create another rule, like allow another tag, and go back and assign those tags to the machines, right? I can do that, but in interest of time, instead of going back and doing that, I already have a tag, because tags are not something that, if I said SSH, I can even say my name for a tag and use that to, assign tags. They just have to match. It's not that like allow SSH means something. It's just a made up name. So if I were to go back and pick up allow SSH from here, and instead of going and creating another tag, I will simply assign this. So anything that has allow SSH tag will also accept this rule. Now, we know that we can have IP ranges as a source filter where the traffic is going to come from, right? But we're not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do source tags. So you cannot just have destination tags, but you can also have source tags. And I'll just allow SSH again, right? Why? Because all of those machines have allow SSH tags associated with it. So what we are saying is anyone, and this only works when you are specifying this within a network. Anything outside of this network, like you cannot tag anything outside of GCP or outside of this network, right? Unless if it's a separate network, those tags will only be visible within that network, not outside of this network. So if you have machines that have similar tags, they can be used as source tags as well, but just within the network. Now we know all of these three machines. So if I were to go back, and if I were to display columns and say network tags, and take out a couple of items from here, just so that we can see the tags. Did I not say them? Network tags, okay. Right. So as you can see, all three of these machines, they are allow SSH, allow SSH. So what we are saying is any machine. So if this goes and trying to connect to this, its source tag will be allow SSH and destination tag will be allow SSH, which means the firewall rule will be allowing the traffic, right? Because it says anything that comes from allow SSH goes to allow SSH is allowed. Similarly, if you go from this machine to these two machines, same rule. And if you go from here to these two machines, same rule, right? Karthikeyan and Kishore, I've looked at your questions. I'll just answer them once I complete this section. Right, and I'll go to other protocols and specify ICMP and say create. Right, so now I have a firewall rule that specifies ICMP. Now, normally if you're doing this on a production environment or your own environments, I would recommend that you create specific tags. Of course, that will mean extra work, but just for this demo session and to make sure to save time so that I don't have to go and add those tags and save them again and again, I've just added I've used the same tag. Otherwise, if you're doing this separately, you'll probably have allow ICMP tag or something like that, or something else, whatever name you want to assign, right? Now, if I go back and try and ping this, and you can see there's a ping response that's coming back. Right. We knew that, obviously this will work because they're in the same subnetwork, right? But what about a different subnetwork and altogether in a different region? Can that work, right? But that's the major question, right? I mean, we have a third instance in Asia East, which is a different subnetwork altogether and a different region altogether. Will that work? Let's try that. And paste the IP address. Okay. As you can see, because the routes exist and now we also have the proper firewall rules, we can definitely ping to that particular subnetwork as well in the other region as well. And if I were to go to the other network, like try and ping this, this is our Asia East machine, instance 3. If I were to ping back, just to verify if this works, and ping 2. And as you can see, the ping does come back perfectly. So that's all great. Wonderful to see that, it's all working as we intended it to do, right? So this is, a quick overview on how you can create networks and work with those networks inside of GCP, right? We still have time, so we'll, take questions. But before we take new questions, I'm just going to answer a couple of questions that's already in the chat. Those two machines are in the same subnet, right? They can forward rule. Then why firewall rule is required? So Karthikeyan, we did mention this, that even if you have two different machines within a same subnetwork, right? Those network interfaces need to have a firewall rule before they can communicate with anything, right? It's by design. So unless you have a firewall rule that specifies if traffic is allowed or denied, there'll be no traffic that will be allowed or denied in that case, right? So it's basically, you can say it's by design that you need to have a firewall rule before traffic can be allowed or denied. Then we have Kishore. Why private IPs are max using class A addresses and max public IP addresses are using class C addresses? So Kishore, we actually use RFC for public addressing. We basically use RFC 19. RFC addresses, private IP, something I'm not used. Right. So we use basically, if we talk about like assigning private IP addresses, there are 3 ranges that are actually, allocated for that. And rest of, of course, there are reserved ranges as well, but the rest are used for public IP addresses, right? So if you talk about like private IP address ranges, right, you can use any 3 of these ranges. That's like a agreed thing, right? So you can pick any of these 3 ranges and you can allocate for the private IP address that's like reserved. You can just say that, this has been reserved and industry agrees to it, right? And the other IP addresses, any other classes that you talk about, those are for the public IP addresses, which also we have run out of. So we do not have enough IPv4 addresses, right? But yeah, and that's how things work. Like, if you look at this, I'll share the link with you, this one. Definitely give it a read to have a better understanding of, what's reserved for private IP addresses and what's reserved for public IP addresses. It will help you have a broader insight into, what are different between private and public IP addresses ranges and what's reserved and what's not. Right. I hope that answers everyone's questions. Right. We'll take more questions now, since that's the end of the demo as well. Right. I do not have anything to show you for the demo perspective. Right. So if you have any other questions, let me know. We'll take those questions now. And if you want to ask anything except that you want to ask something related to certification, I'll be more than happy to guide around that as well. Any trail account for our lab activity? So what you can do is, if you go to Google Cloud and try and sign up for a free account, like right now, because since this is just a webinar, we do not have any labs associated with this, right? So, but if you go to, actually, I'm already signed in, so I need to first log out before I can show you that. Let me cancel this one and open another incognito window. That's fine. Right. So what I'm going to do is open another incognito window. Console.cloud.google.com. Right. So what you can do is you can sign up for a free account. Obviously, if you already have used your email for a free account before, definitely cannot do that. You need to use a new email address. Uh, you need to specify your credit card information as well, and you'll get a free trial GCP. Yeah. So you'll get an account and $300 worth of credit for 3 months, and you can try out these services in that particular account as a student, and you can learn out and try out new things over there, right? But apart from that, I do not know if we are at this point offering any labs for this webinar. I mean, I'm not aware of that. Probably check with the SkillUp team if they are offering, but I'm not sure if for the 1 hour webinar there'll be any follow-up labs that will be provided. But in case you want to explore on your own, it's always a good idea to get and sign up for this free tier account. So you won't be charged unless you upgrade your account. Even if your 3 months expire and this credit expires, Google will simply suspend your account. So don't worry about that. You'll only charge if you upgrade your account to a non-free tier account, which is a paid account basically. Then only in that case you'll be charged. Otherwise, there is no charge. I hope that helps you, with lab activity and stuff. So share this link in the chat so you guys can go there and see for yourself. Sure. Thanks, sir. Please let me know if you have any other questions. If you do not see any other questions, we'll wrap this up. I know we are already 6 minutes, post our scheduled stop. But yeah, I mean, we can take, I guess, 4 more minutes to see if there are any other questions, and then we'll take a hard stop. So there's a question from Tushar: when real class will start? Check with the SkillUp team. They might post a schedule for proper detailed 3 days or 4 days classes, right? So they will give you better insights on the entire class. When we do take that up, right? Of course, this is more of a webinar demo kind of a session. But yeah, there'll be definitely proper classes that will be held. Just check with the SkillUp team and the schedule and when the schedule will be posted, and then you can enroll in those classes. Yep. So there is a message from SkillUp team. You will get the schedule, and then you can enroll accordingly. Shashidhara, there's a question from Shashidhara. Can we get a recording of this session? Yes, absolutely. Recording will be shared. SkillUp team will, share the recording with you guys. Do you give any vouchers for taking certifications? So Harold, that can definitely be discussed, right? We are not giving any free vouchers as of now, right? But when we start the courses and stuff, we'll engage with Google to see if we can get discounted vouchers or free vouchers. Google does have programs that gives free vouchers if you complete a particular skill set and batch, right? Definitely we'll share that information with you as well if there are free vouchers that are being run by Google, or specifically if there are vouchers or discounted vouchers that is run by us in the future. But right now, I'm not aware of any program that allows us to do that, but there will be in the future for sure. You're welcome, guys. Can you please explain roles on GCP? When you talk about roles, Hanumant, do you mean like, people who are going to be working in GCP, right? Like cloud architect, developers and stuff, or, there's specific, terms within IAM as well. I'm not sure. I hope you mean like, what kind of professional will you become, like a cloud architect, developer, data engineer, something like that? That's what you meant? Mm. Jobs. Okay. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are multiple openings that you'll find in GCP, and obviously GCP certifications are the most hot topic in the industry at this point of time. And obviously there are lots and lots of jobs that are opening up as well. The ones that you'll commonly see is associate related to associate cloud engineers, which are mostly sysops people. So you'll see openings related to cloud engineers, people who are supposed to do stuff within GC like create networks, to automation around networks and stuff. So that's definitely one. There are also openings for cloud architects, people who will be designing stuff. So they'll be called as cloud architects, and the other one was cloud engineer, right? We also have people who will be doing data engineering, dealing with big data and machine learning stuff. So we have data engineers or data scientists that takes care of that, or data analysts. So we have specific job roles in the area of data scientists, data analysts, and data engineers that takes care of that. Right. We also have security administrator or network administrators. Those are like specialty roles and specialty certifications around those as well. People will be handling just the network aspects of GCP, or be handling networking related to GCP, or security within GCP, or security aspects of GCP, right? We also have people who handle both GCP and G Suite as well. G Suite is just like Office 365 or Azure Active Directory. G Suite is specifically a separate office productivity suite from Google Cloud, from Google, and it integrates very well with GCP. So there is a special job called as collaboration engineers, people who can handle both G Suite and stuff that they can integrate with G Suite to give a good experience for the end users, so they can log in easily, like single sign-on and stuff like that. So that's another opening. So overall, we have cloud engineers, we have cloud architects, data engineers, data scientists, data analysts, right? And then we have security administrators, we have or security engineers, network engineers, and then finally we have collaboration engineers. So these are some of the designations that you'd probably hear about, right? And you can append, of course, GCP in front of all of those positions. I hope that answers your question. How many hours will it take to complete the GCP course? I mean, as an instructor, I've taken this course and it takes around like 40 hours for the entire course, right? But like how many hours it will take for you to complete the course and prepare for the certification, that's absolutely up to you. Everyone has their own pace. You can probably learn it in 3 days, or maybe take 3 months. When I started learning Google Cloud Platform like a few years back, I think it was 4 or 5 years back, and when I started learning, it took me 3 to 4 months to entirely learn the platform. And when I say entirely learn platform, only from a cloud architect perspective, and then prepare for the exams, it took me 3 to 4 months, right? And like I said, I mean, as an instructor, if I'm giving a course, there are specific courses that we do. It's not a single course, but if I have to like combine all the courses and give you a duration, it will be 5 to 6 days, depending upon if you take one of the fundamental course or not. But it's around 5 to 6 days worth of courses as an instructor that I teach. Each day is around 8 hours. So 8 into 6 is like 40, 48 hours, something like that. So 40 to 48 hours, or I'll just say 40 to 50 hours as an instructor to teach the course. As a student, it's really up to you how soon you can understand and grasp the concepts. Same applies to question that Tushar you have asked as well. All right, I think that should be it. Thank you guys for attending today's course, and we'll end today's session, and we'll see you tomorrow for the next webinar. Thank you guys. Bye.